Buildings and Grounds meeting to order. We can stand and say the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so first this evening we have roll call.
Elizabeth Balberman.
Here.
Mary Lee Hall.
Here.
Samantha Hall. William Hall.
Here.
Jeremy Hash.
Here.
Jennifer Henkel.
Here.
Nathan Henkel.
Here.
James Holland.
Here.
Josie Wilson.
Here.
So I would like to announce that we had an executive meeting before this to deal with some legal matters. And now I would like to open up for public comment, 2.01. We have two people signed up for public comment. Susan, will you be keeping time?
Yes, once I find my phone.
Okay. So first we have Mike here.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here today as a follow-up to the comments I made at the budget meeting in November, primarily to thank Dr. Bryson, Susan Green, and the board for their attention over the last several months, getting us to where we expect. The presentation that Susan will make tonight will help us a great deal taking care of the safety issues we've had with the fields. But before that, I'd like to make a couple of general comments. One of the items I had discussed in November was sponsorships. Susan has indicated that sponsorships is something that we'll be able to do. We're hoping that we can raise some money for some of the miscellaneous items that I'm going to discuss, and I've already handed over to Bill a complete list of those things. So I don't know what your time frame is, Susan, but it would be very helpful if we could have something in writing form, what you're looking for, so we can start the process of soliciting and following whatever rules that you have. All right, so that would be very helpful. Some of the miscellaneous items, not the big item which we anticipate that Susan will be talking about, which is the fields, there's a handful of smaller items that we need. The first one is water. Water? Why do you need water? Well, we have a water line to the backstop, but the water line isn't turned on because of winter, and we don't have the proper spigots and whatnot at the backstop. We need water to be able to water the grass when it's dry, but more importantly, water the field dirt itself to keep that moist and keep it soft. Otherwise, it turns to concrete after about a week in the sun. A couple other things. Gravel. We need about 25 yards of gravel. Over the last 20 years, the ground has settled below the fence line of an enclosed field, and small gravel would be very helpful to be able to fill in those holes, and the umpires gave us a number of looks last year because of that. If we can have the gravel, the baseball team will take care of distributing it around the fence. We haven't had new bases in 20 years. We need rakes and drags. We haven't had those for 20 years, so they're rather old. The last big item from my perspective of the little things is materials. We need clay, probably almost a skid worth, because we have to continue to build the home plate area, we have to maintain the pitcher's mound, but more importantly, we need to create 2 new pitcher's mounds as warm-ups off the field so that we can use those not only in game preparation, but we're going to have to use one field for both teams. So having multiple pitching mounds will be very helpful for the organization process. The other things Bill can cover if he thinks it's appropriate. The last 3 items we're hoping is on Susan's list. We're not quite sure. One is batting cage. We have a cage down at the lower field, but the floor of the batting cage is mud. You use a bucket of balls and have to throw them away because they get weighted, they get wet. We lost between 10 and 12 dozen balls, just our team alone, last year.
1 minute remaining.
I'm sorry?
1 minute.
Yes, absolutely. So I would like to finish by thanking a young fella that was critical to this process. I'm sorry, not a young fella. I'm talking about Jim over here, Jim Holly. Jim took a comment at a social. He invited us to talk with him. We expected to take 30 minutes. He took 3 hours. And as a result of those 3 hours, we put together this book that both the administration and the school board have used in assessing the process. I believe he's the only decision maker, I could be wrong, who actually walked the 2 fields, and he spent almost an hour and a half doing that. He also recommended that I speak at the November budget meeting, and he has been in contact with us on a regular basis. So we very much appreciate Jim's assistance. All right? Thank you.
Next on public comment, we have Bob Betts.
Good evening, Bob Betts, Shrewsbury Township. So my initial statement tonight is in regards to the asbestos abatement situation. And I'm wondering how we can grab a handle on this situation moving forward. Looking back at the possible mistakes that were made or the misses that happened, I'm curious as to who was tasked with the initial investigation of the possibility of asbestos existing in the building project. I have a lot of years in commercial and industrial construction experience, primarily in schools. And I can assure you that all school projects are supposed to be reviewed for all toxic items, asbestos, lead, and any other toxin that may exist in the building, especially one that kids are occupying regularly. And when we talk about it, the cost overruns, it appears as if maybe we're trying to paint a picture that this type of mishap is commonplace in construction, and that a cost overrun like this is kind of small in comparison to the overall project. So we should just move past it. But I can assure you this is a big miss and a pretty big deal. The cost alone on this item is only a portion of the way through. And we're already, by my count through the old minutes, well over $1 million in the hole on abatement, with more to go. And that's it looking through past change orders shown in the old meeting minutes. So I'm curious if we hired an outside firm to perform an assessment, or if we did any assessments internally. Any firm that we would have hired and missed this amount of work would have a liability to answer to, or answer for. And if we did this internally, or based it off of old reports from renovations past, I would say shame on us. Our internal resources may be very knowledgeable in these matters, but from what I've seen, we've got one guy handling this massive project, along with every need of every facility in the district. That's too much to ask of one person. I can remember walking through the high school hallways as part of the logo transition committee a couple years ago, and I can remember specifically out loud stating, how much is the abatement going to cost over here, when we looked at the green tiles on the wall and the terrazzo on the floor, and all of those just standout items that anybody that's worked in commercial construction knows come along with the possibility of abatement. And I can be honest, at that moment, there was not an answer given. There was no conversation about it, but you could see wheels turning. Beyond abatement, looking at the current practices that we're utilizing in the building construction, I do have a few questions. I'm curious, who is our firm performing inspections from day to day? Specifically, I'm noticing on the new admin renovations going on, we've got brick masonry work being installed daily in below freezing temperatures without any proper heat protection or freeze protection or heating procedures. In the masonry world, when you lay masonry, you would either put a tent with heat or you would blanket the wall in below freezing temperatures to keep the water that's in the mortar from freezing up and cracking under load. And that is not occurring on that entire admin wing, which draws into question, did it happen anywhere else when the school was worked on below freezing temps? Just in the last few weeks visiting the campus, I've noticed that happening several days in a row. So I would call into question whether or not it's being inspected, and if it's not, we should get somebody to inspect it to verify it is structurally intact and there are no cracks that we haven't seen yet. And kind of finally, do we have a CM firm representing the district in this endeavor? Or are we just utilizing GC oversight for this project? I'm sure our GC is capable of overseeing the job, but to be honest, their first allegiance is to their company and to themselves, not to the district. We need to have a firm on site that is solely dedicated to the district so that we know that our dollars are being spent appropriately and that the work being done is done in the utmost possible way. And I think it would behoove us to get a hold of that situation now before we get ourselves into another asbestos-type situation. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment? Okay, thank you. Moving on. Item 3.01, Susquehannock baseball fields. I believe we have a presentation in regards to the field. After the presentation, I would like to take some time for the board to have open deliberation about the issues.
Good evening. So this evening, we do have a presentation concerning the baseball facilities. We have with us our athletic director, Mr. Keeney. We have our head baseball coach, Mr. Stoneberg. We have Mrs. Green, who takes care of all of our finances, and then we have buildings and grounds, which is Mr. Buffington, which is that individual that has this huge job of maintaining all 5 buildings with his crews and making sure we have quality facilities for all of our individuals and all of our kids. There you go. Text, not my thing. There we go. So just for reference, we have this in the presentation. It was just easier even when we were discussing fields, trying to figure out old fields, new fields, this field. This is a standard map that we have in all of our emergency management binders. And you can see each of the fields that are numbered. The fields that we're going to primarily focus on is field number 8, which is we deem our new baseball field. Field number 3 is the old varsity baseball field, which also has the H in it for the helipad in the event of emergency. And we'll also touch, you'll hear Mr. Keeney potentially talk a little bit about field 10, which is our varsity softball field. And then we'll just kind of talk a little bit about field usage with all of our fields. It's just easier for us to reference them by number, just so that you have the map so you can take a look at it, rather than try to, this one's behind this building, this one's to the east and west of this building. So that's just an easy reference for you. All right.
Current baseball field, so just to start off of what we actually have. We are fortunate, we are one of 4 districts within the YIAA of 21 school districts to have 2 fields, which is certainly a huge benefit to our kids. But that being said, obviously we're looking at possible upgrades and things that could potentially need to happen. For reference, field 3, okay, that is what we call our old baseball field. That is the one up by the field house. Okay. Some things to know about field 3 is, first of all, the layout. The natural layout of that field does present some challenges just because of the way it was built. If you look at the outfield, left field is 13 feet higher than right field. Third base is, 18 inches, I believe, above first base. Why is it like that? Because it's a natural drainage. That side of our campus drains down over the hill, down over the baseball field, and off. Because of that, you see it moves dirt. There's some swells that were actually built in the original construction of the field where the water runs, so there are some places that go up and down. Field 8, that is our new baseball field. That is located behind Southern Elementary School. Historically, we've used that as the junior varsity field, practice field, and has served as a multi-purpose field. The band uses it for practice and so forth. In 2023, we did use that field as our varsity baseball field because the other field was down for work. And I think at this point, Joel, I'd like you to pop in. When playing on the two fields, the playability from Field 8 has come up as favorable for Coach, so.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and for all the reasons he just discussed. I mean, a 13-foot drop from left field to right field, you're literally playing on an angle. And then the swells that he's talking about are areas where if you're running and not looking, someone's going to get hurt.
Okay, review of fields, Randy.
So just want to kind of take us through the last few months and, as we look even back further than that, one of the things that Mr. Keeney and I do on a routine basis, typically, twice a year or so, walk the fields, not only the baseball fields, but all our fields. We actually rate those, show the work that's been done on those fields, and provide a report to the board. We'll continue to do that as we move forward. We also, over the last couple of months, took a concentrated look, particularly at the baseball fields, and included in that concentrated look was district administration, baseball head coach, our maintenance staff, and we included Heritage Lawn and Landscape Care. It's one of our contractors that work on the ball fields as well. Heritage Lawn and Landscape Care has extensive experience with local districts and even had some college experience. And we look to them to kind of look at our field and, judge where we are, and their response was, we're kind of the middle of the pack, certainly not the best, certainly not the worst, but kind of in the middle there. So where do we go from here? And what kind of challenges are ahead of us, or that we ran through. Certainly in 2023, I think most of us will remember we had a drought, up to 7.5 inches below average. Certainly, watering our fields becomes a challenge. Just to remind the board, this campus is on a well, so we do need to be careful how we water fields and things. But certainly it does pose a challenge for us. One of the other things, and Mr. Keeney can talk a little bit to this as well. Our fields have multiple use on them, so they're getting beat up, quite regularly. So that's a challenge in itself, and I know it presents scheduling challenges and things. We are fortunate, and I think Brad's got that stat. We're one of just a few, four districts in our region that have 2 baseball and 2 softball fields. So, in that sense, we are fortunate. But let Brad speak a little bit to that.
Our grass fields do get a lot of use. Obviously, we do have 2 turf fields, which is also a blessing, but we also have anywhere from 600 athletes throughout the year. You also have the band. You also have other extracurricular activities. You got phys ed classes, so forth, that go outside, and that doesn't even count any outside organizations that want to use our fields. So we are very busy on campus on our athletic fields. And that always presents a challenge, because when's the best time to rest this field? When's the best time to do this? And you don't want to do it in a way that takes opportunities away for kids, or, makes it too much of a challenge, like even with the band, with the amount of stuff they have to move. So if you look kind of down through that list, you can see there's not a whole lot of time where this grass is sitting there. Over the summer, that doesn't even count over the summer of all the different sports teams and so forth that come in, and the band and so forth. So Another challenge that we do have to keep in mind as we look at upgrading any fields or any facilities is that the PIAA does promote equal opportunity, which under Title IX includes facilities. So if we're going to upgrade certain fields, we need to make sure that we have equitable access for all our sports. And obviously rainstorms and scheduling, it's a constant nightmare. But like I said, the biggest challenge is it's tough to find the times that are going to work best, so.
Yeah, and one other thing to quickly add here as we're working through this, we have a very large campus here, about 99 acres. And, you know, one of the aha moments for me is although we have 99 acres, we've pretty much used any flat or relatively flat space on here. So to come up with other places for groups is very challenging as we're working through it. We're continuing to look at that, but we have a lot of land, but a lot of it's very hilly. So that is another challenge that we're going through. We've pretty much taken every flat spot.
So certainly, one of the things, you know, we want to talk to the board, things we're already doing, you know, so we have a contract service spending about $20,000 a year, you know, that, you know, we're treating for grubs, we're treating for crabgrass control, you know, we're really treating that grass surface, you know, to make it as playable as it can be, you know, for all our grass fields, you know, and certainly, you know, round all year long, you know, different treatments and things, and, you know, trying to keep them in great shape. Besides the contracted maintenance as well, our maintenance department also, you know, obviously works with mowing and game day preparations, aerate and seed, you know, so one of the most important things for grass is, you know, get that air into the ground, so actually getting tines into the ground and things. So on a routine basis, we're aerating and seeding, as well as some infield maintenance as well. And one of the other keys to maintenance is the lips. And so if you don't know that term, so basically between your infield and your outfield, between the infield mix and the grass, it can start to build up there, you know, and the ball can have a funny hop, you know. You don't want that. You want a good play, you know. So certainly that the lips are an area that, you know, we concentrate on it as well.
Recommendations for the short term of where we're going. I think the first piece is we want to consider which level, you know, which field we want to label as the varsity field. We've already had plenty of conversation with that, the pros and cons to each field. But we do want to determine one to be the varsity field. And that one would be maintained at a higher level than the other, right? That would be your game field. That would be the one that, you know, for varsity games, for postseasons, things like that. Continue to evaluate alternatives for our band and other activities that are outside that may be misplaced due to using that as our varsity field.
So one of the keys to making these decisions and working through this is kind of like moving chess pieces simply, and we've collaborated with Mr. Poole and we continue to do so. Those of you that are not in the band, the first month is really just all drill. And in order for them to do that, they need to actually mark the field from position to position when this band is actually moving. It does not, it seems like, well, we'll just put them on a turf. That's an easy fix. The problem is, in talking to Mr. Poole, is in order for them to do it on the AstroTurf, they actually have to put painter's tape down, which means they have to go put the painter's tape down with an X, and then at the end of practice, go pick up the painter's tape and take it off, because that interferes with the playing surface for the teams that come in to play athletics events. So a grass field really is ideal for the first several months of marching band to allow them to be able to mark the field and be able to move so that they can get their show squared away. Once that first month to 4 to 6 weeks is taken care of, in talking to Mr. Poole, they can easily move off of a grass field and go on a turf because the field show is already set, and they can move based on where they are field position-wise, just with the yard marker lines. with very little additional work. So that is something that we're working on. We've put a couple feelers out there as far, and we've looked at some things, and we're still continuing to work on that one. So that is one of the groups that we are definitely, I don't want to say concerned about, but we are working very closely to make sure that their needs are met.
We're also looking at alternatives for cars for events like graduation, larger football games, to make sure, we're not bringing cars onto the fields, which can, leave divots and so forth. In the short term here, the plan for spring is to use the new baseball field, fill in depressions with topsoil and overseed, and any other recommendations from the landscaping company from the standpoint of playability. We'd start making repairs to the old baseball field, specifically the outfield, in 2024, which would mean we would have to shut that field down so that we could get that kind of work done to it, with the recommendations from our landscaping company, and also address kind of the swales, as we talked about, some of the depressions in the outfield, to reduce the grades on those swales for better playability and safety.
And did you want to add something? So just to kind of follow up on that, Field 8, I did a little, since I like history and I teach social studies, I did a little digging. Field 8 was originally, when it was built, designed to be the varsity field. However, there were some concerns apparently raised by a past administrator because of the elementary playground being there with traffic potentially, little kids playing. That's since been rectified since new equipment and things have put into the field. But that was originally supposed to be slated as the original, or as the varsity baseball field because of its flat playing surface. And correct me if I'm wrong, Coach, that is the field you would prefer to play on, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Going to that field, a couple potential changes here. Let me get this here. There we go. Obviously, we want to maintain one field at that level. On Field 8, on the new baseball field, currently there is no scoreboard, so we would have to look at that option. We would want to look at bathrooms, as we talked about earlier with Title IX, to match Field 10, the current softball field. Right now, they would be similar, as they both use porta potties. Batting cages and bullpens, Joel, jump in here. We would want to be able to basically set up and be able to run a postseason event.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, at any home game that we would host, the expectation from any coach coming in would be that there's a place, being the bullpen, for their pitchers to warm up, not only pre-game, but during game, and then batting cages for them to use for pre-game batting practice. Also, with us going to one field, the ability to host two teams practicing on every given day, we really need a batting cage so we can have one team perhaps hitting while another's on the field, and coming up with a way to manage that.
And another challenge is, right now, the current backstop on that field is a little bit shorter, so I know Coach talked about losing some balls in the batting cage, but you also have the potential to lose some balls with foul balls because the backstop would just need to be come up a little bit higher. And the other piece is obviously rotating usage of the field to limit the damage. One thing I also want to bring up, and just so you guys have an understanding too, the way the postseason is currently has changed from the past. You used to play at neutral fields and so forth. Our teams have been very successful, so we do a lot more postseason hosting because the higher seeds now host almost all the way to the finals. So, which is really cool because we're getting a lot more championship games on our campus. So that's something to consider when looking at our field quality.
So what we're recommending, for the two baseball fields, at least for the grass and infield surfaces, some professional services. So if you look at this for Field 8 and Field 3, we're looking this spring to go in, fill the outfield depressions with soil, seed, and actually use some grow tarps because it'll be early in the spring season. And then in the fall, come back into that field, take it out of play, aerate, top dress, seed the entire grass field. And then with field number 3, because of the natural drainage that we were talking about, we need to be careful that how we come in with soil to do that and kind of soften the swales with that, but we would be bringing in truckloads of soil to soften those swales, aerate and seed those fields. And we'd be looking to do that here in the spring and take that field out of service. One of the things that's important, with the fields is getting rest, allowing them to rest, take activity off of them, to allow that grass to get established is so important to those fields. So on the January board meeting, we tabled those two items. We would bring those back to the February board meeting. So as we look to the future, and not only baseball fields, but all our grass fields, one of the things we may want to consider, is a program where we aerate more often, we top dress. So top dressing is kind of a mixture of organic matter that's spread, on top of the soil in the grass, helps to soften the grass, or soften the surface, and really feed the grass and create a better playing surface. So one of the things that we would put forth is to look at all our grass fields. What would that take? We certainly wouldn't do every field every year. We'd put them on a rotation, but we'd probably be looking at $25,000 to $30,000 a year to do that, to try to, improve all of our grass fields.
Okay, so I give a huge thank you to everyone that worked together to put this through. I know personally I learned a lot about resting the fields. That's something as an administrative team I think that we're going to need to take a look at in conjunction with our coaches, because although we want to be everything to everybody, we want to make sure that children have whatever fields they need. One of the things I think that we have to prioritize is if we keep putting students and folks on them constantly all year long, they're not going to hold up. So that is something that we need to take a closer look at as we're working through things, especially for our internal groups, making sure we prioritize those. So as we're working through that, we also had Mr. Hare talk about sponsorships. This is something where we do not have a very detailed program internally. But as we were talking with the baseball group about the need for sponsorship, we're definitely open to sponsorships. I don't think that we need to wait till we have a detailed program in place. It's something where if we want to move forward, I think there's a couple pieces that we have to make sure we understand. First of all, it can't be sponsorships for the sake of getting sponsorships. We need to have a dedicated, approved, and agreed to reason for the sponsorship. So, for instance, he mentioned some things. We'll have to evaluate those things and make sure that's something that the district wants to move forward with and wants to do long-term. So if we're taking money from groups, we also have to make sure that if we're doing upgrades to a particular sport through sponsorships, is there another sport for equity purposes that we would have to do internally? So as we're looking at that, that's very important. And because we have to evaluate in the best interest of all of our programs and that long-term viability piece. So we can give you some examples through the years where we've had donations for things that have cost the district a lot more than the actual donation, and not something that was a priority to maintain long-term. And I'm not saying that's the thing with sponsorships, but I do think it is very important as we start to move forward with that program that we're all agreeing to what we're taking the money for before we ask for the money, and move forward in that direction. And I think it can be as simple as having a conversation, sitting down, agreeing to that, bringing it to the board for approval, and then allowing the group to move forward with it. But I don't think it has to be a hugely complicated thing as we're moving forward with it. So I will open up. Does anyone have anything else to add? So, huge thank you. Go ahead.
I want to thank Coach for putting the time, and he came in several times throughout the day, and I know he doesn't work in the building, so for him to be able to run in like that, I appreciate it.
Do we have questions?
One quick question, just clarifying question. When we're talking about the future action items, the 25,000 to 30,000 per year, is that over and above the 20,000 that we currently do? Okay, that's how I took it, but just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
I have a question. Can the band practice on an asphalt surface?
So they can. One of the concerns is when they use the grass turf, it's at its hottest point, so putting them out there is difficult. Our new design with our new parking lot that we'll eventually get is not built for that. We have looked at using potentially this area behind the middle school, be it where the buses load every day. So that is an area that we're looking at as potential. During the school year, not too bad, because Mr. Keeney does a phenomenal job working with Mr. Poole to get them onto the turf fields. They come in the evening. It really, for the band, it really comes down to that first week of August through till about mid-September. We have to figure out where to put them. But in the evening, potentially, we could look at the down here behind the middle school gym. Then we have to figure out how to block off traffic to ensure that they are practicing and nobody's coming up the driveway.
I have another question then. Have we looked at any artificial turf for the baseball and softball field?
We did some early looks at that, and to do a baseball and softball field, we're looking about $2 million, a little north of that, I think it was. And, as we know, with artificial turf, that's good for about 10 years or so. And then you won't have to do the whole thing again because your drainage will be done, but, you're gonna have probably half that cost again in 10 years.
50,000 a year. If you, right, or so sorry, you said 2 million, so $1 million over 10 years, so 100,000 a year, roughly.
It's
200.
2 million.
2 million, so half of that again, over 10 years, so 100,000 a year.
For the second,
For the second phase.
yeah, so for the first 10.
Yeah, sorry, ongoing, you basically, because I look at the long term here of 25 to 30,000 per year, and that to me is indefinite. If we went with those, this would be an indefinite $100,000 per year to go to turf.
Yeah.
So it's not like we can spend a lot of money now and save money long term. It's spend a lot of money and spend a lot of money long term.
Right.
Is turf. Okay.
Yeah.
If I can, the 25 to 30,000 for the air raid, top dress, and overseed, is that for, am I reading that correctly, that's all the grass fields then covered?
Yeah, and it'd be put in a rotation, so not every field's getting done every year. We would rotate them, so approximately, I think, 3 fields or so a year would get done, in that rotation.
And is that enough to take care of them every other year?
We consulted our, landscape contractor, and he believes that we would certainly see improvements, very good improvements. And it's certainly well above what we're doing currently.
I think the other piece to put with that piece is also this resting the fields more than we are. So we'll definitely be taking a look at that.
So the 20,000 for the grass field maintenance, the grub control, the crabgrass, is that also all fields?
That's all grass. All grass.
All grass fields?
Yep.
And then if we're looking at another 25 to 30 to maintain those fields in addition, so it'd be like 50, is that what you said, 50?
About 50,000 a year.
Okay.
To
Thank you.
maintain all grass fields, whereas if we did turf, we'd only be doing, you're talking just baseball and softball, and that already jumps to 100,000 a year to maintain that, and then that doesn't deal with any of the other grass fields. There would still be costs associated with those.
Right.
It's one baseball and one softball.
One
correct?
baseball.
One baseball, one
One
softball.
baseball,
Okay,
one
so,
softball.
yeah, so all of the grass fields we'd still have
And
ongoing.
that first 10 years is actually 200,000.
I'm thinking really long-term, even in the really long-term, it seems like turf is just more expensive to maintain. I wanted to mention one other thing with the idea of the marching band practicing on asphalt. I just want to raise this because sometimes they get forgotten. Even though our entire band dances more than I ever did in marching band, the color guard very much do, and that could be an issue for their stuff. Now, marking drill, they could probably do some of their practice on asphalt, but very quickly they would get to a point where they couldn't do any of their actual work on asphalt without injuring themselves.
Is Field 6 too far away for band? I seriously don't know, so I don't mean to sound.
Talking about the band.
Yes, for band to practice on. Field 6 is the baseball or football practice field, I guess.
In the front.
So one of the issues, and I did.
Talk about the multi-purpose.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
six is,
no,
is the top,
back
yep.
here.
So we have taken, we've looked at that. One of the issues is just getting all their equipment up the incline. So there would have to be some additional infrastructure put in potentially for them to be able to move up and down there, and that's a fair distance. Ideally, in talking to Mr. Poole, Field 7 would be the ideal permanent location for the band. It's closer if some type of macadam's drive was put up around the up towards where the throwing areas used to be.
Yeah.
That would be ideal because it's right where it's a shorter distance. So 6 is a potential. We have talked about it. We haven't finalized everything. We actually even looked at, we used Google Earth to measure it, and then Mr. Poole went up and actually measured it. We looked at the old throwing area as a potential area. It's just slightly too small for their entire field. So it's another maybe 15 yards, and it'd been ideal, and it'd been perfect, and they would have loved it. So 7's actually kind of, if they had their choice, 7's where they'd like to go and make that their permanent home.
I just figured that was more uphill.
Well, it is, if you had the correct road access up there, they could get up there, and that's where they would
So you
prefer.
would look at road going the
Extending past, right off of
Baseball side.
right off the field hockey
baseball
field.
field 8 side.
Yes,
Yeah.
and go straight up through there. That would,
Okay.
7's actually, that's their ideal. We are looking at 6, like I said, we're also looking at the back of potentially using the macadam when we need to, the turf. And 9, again, down front is just it's too much of a slope, so to be able, and it's a main traffic area. Yeah, so we're working closely with Mr. Poole.
If we went over to 8 being the primary varsity baseball field, could they then be on 3?
Yes, they could. We've discussed that because there is already the infrastructure to get up through there. They would be willing, Mr. Poole's definitely willing to use number 3 as well.
And is there any, the map doesn't show topography. Is there any ability to use 3 in the event of overflow parking to remove that burden from 8?
It's going to be difficult with the field house there. The other challenge, if the band would go on 3, we would have to recognize, that the marked out depressions, could come back, and we're going to have to continue to deal with
Which is
those.
what we're dealing with on 8
Yeah,
now.
Yep. But yeah, parking on 3 is a little tight because of the field house and getting them in there. We've looked at several different options, whether it's 3 or even getting them back to 6 with the new parking lot that's behind. We've had early discussions for graduation, and it's our belief that we're gonna stay off of grass fields. We're gonna put them everywhere you can, safely. But yeah, we've worked as a team that we're gonna keep them off the grass fields.
It is probably best, if at all possible.
Yeah, and just the attraction or because obviously, we want to get as many people here for graduation. It's our biggest event, obviously, Numbers, I think it's 175 cars you can put on Field 8, and I think slightly more, so it's slightly more on Field 9. It's significant, the number of cars that we can put there and the number of more folks that we can, but, we're working through as a team to keep them off the grass fields, but get as many people here for graduation.
Is Field 9 a specific field to any sport?
Field 9 is,
Field hockey.
yeah, Field 9, we use typically, it's, in the fall, you're going to see junior high field hockey down there, junior high soccer in the spring,
But they're all practices I'm taking?
practices, yes. We do not run competitions down there.
That's what I meant. There's no competitions happening on it.
Right. Now, I try to keep it flat because the junior high field hockey players need a flat surface, and it's hard to get them on the turf with the amount of varsity teams we have in the fall.
Right.
So that's like, right now, Field 9 is the best place I can put junior high field hockey, and I want to try to keep that nice. Because I will say, the sport of field hockey changes significantly if there's bumps and divots and so forth, so.
The other thing with field hockey, we try to keep it really short grass so that, any change in grade really accents that as well.
Certainly. So I have several questions, if I may. In reference to resting the grass and also in years where we have high drought issues, I know we allow outside organizations to use our fields, which I'm not discouraging. However, if we are in a situation where a field is getting torn up or we're into a drought where it looks like there's high probability, do we have any mechanism for limiting the usage of outside sports teams?
We could. We don't currently have protocol in place, but we could.
Yeah, but certainly, other options include our Shrewsbury and Friendship campuses as well.
Right.
Have fields there as well.
Right.
But yeah.
I mean, I'm not,
So that's definitely something we're gonna, if we're gonna commit to the resting of the fields, and that's why I brought it up a couple times, we're definitely gonna have to bring that up as a concern, because, not that we're gonna discourage people, but we may have to send them to the other two campuses, just to be able to do that.
certainly. I mean, obviously, it doesn't apply to turf, but then there's only so much turf and so much availability, so. Also, in making, if we make the decision to make Field 8 the primary varsity baseball field, Field 3 then being, I assume, the JV field or maybe more practice field, obviously that comes with some challenges. Some of them are highlighted here. I think for us to make a good decision, we have to have a clearer understanding of that cost. Obviously, we would have to, if it's going to become the permanent field, we would have to move the sign that we just installed. And, we would have to provide the necessary utilities in moving that sign. It's also moving us farther away from, the field house. I understand that that may not be as large of an issue because, look at Field 10. Look how far away from, the field house they are. And we can make other accommodations at limited costs for facilities for Field 8. But I do think we need to have a good understanding of, first, to be certain, before we would spend the money to move the sign, that that's going to be its permanent home, and then secondly, what that cost would be. So I think that's all of my questions. Anyone else?
So down there, just to clarify, if we change to Field 8, we would need to have scoreboard, bathrooms added in, batting cages, and pitcher's mounds for practice. Is that correct?
To be equitable to Field 10,
Okay.
you would have to have a scoreboard.
Right.
It would be an extension to the backstop and like a bullpen, somewhere to warm up.
You had something?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, the bathrooms already exist. It's just a porta potty.
Yeah. it's-
Right,
which is the same as-
I know there's porta potties down there, but I wasn't sure if we're being asked for facilities specifically.
Not at this time.
Okay.
No, I want to clarify too, and everybody else speak. I think this is our long-term recommendation. At this point, the two proposals that were on the January board meeting, and will be moved to the February board meeting, would hold even if we chose not to move the varsity field. That's to upkeep the fields as existing. Long-term, though, we wanted to point out, here's where we want to move in the future. We're not ready to answer all those questions, and we still want to, we still have to figure out where some of the other groups need to go, some of those other pieces to actually move forward with those long-term recommendations. But I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of the things that we're recommending would change regardless of which field was going to be deemed the varsity field.
As far as you're talking about grass and things of that nature.
Yeah, so, yeah, the two proposals that we brought forward, yeah, I think regardless, I think we would still recommend them.
They don't encompass the discussion of the cost of creating or making it the primary varsity field.
Yeah, I believe in our discussions as a team that the other items, we certainly could, and did last season, go another season without, those items as the decision would be made in the future, whether to stay at 8 or go back to 3.
Coach.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, we played a 24 game season on 8 last year. It's just missing the stuff that kind of makes it varsity level, right? I think that's the word we're using, like a game-ready field. We're just missing the things that a hosting team should be providing, but we're putting the kids on a much safer environment than we were on 3. I mean, we had teams come in and were a little skeptical of playing us on 3 before last year's work, and then the future work that's being discussed.
And maybe you can talk, because we talked extensively in our discussions about, okay, for season 24, what will we absolutely need to have? What would you think we need? So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and a couple of these items I don't think are high-ticket items. I don't know what everyone's gauge is. In terms of bullpen, I mean, we're talking about some dirt and clay, and honestly, the rest of the pieces we really have. We just really need a location. We built the one on the top field just as a coaching staff. And then the batting cage, there is a batting cage in place. It's just right now the floor is earth, so proving some form of flooring, whether that be old turf, or rubber mulch, or an item that doesn't ruin baseballs. Because if it rained at any time in the last 2 weeks and you go in there with a bucket of baseballs, you can throw them in the dumpster when you're done. Like, these aren't high-ticket, big items. As far as the scoreboard, we haven't had it. I mean, it went to the top field last year, and if we need to go another season, we go another season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a shame that, we do have it, but we can't use it, and it's brand new, and we can't use it, but, I mean, that's a different topic. So you said we don't have all the things that we should. What would be, in your mind, the top things? Would that be the things you just listed?
I think the items I've brought up so far are your must-haves, not your wants. If a team's coming in, we need to give them somewhere at a varsity level, we need to give them somewhere for their pitcher to warm up. We need to give them somewhere to take some batting practice, because it's provided to us everywhere we go. So that to me is the minimum.
Okay, and maybe, if possible, we could take some time to look into what the costs of providing those things would be, in addition to, field grass maintenance, to see what those costs would be to give you those two components at this field, at least for this coming season. What do you feel like the likelihood would be after what has always been the varsity baseball field has been maintained? Swales are going to get deeper over time, it's the way the field is shedding water, it's going to make the depressions deeper and all of those things. Fixing those things, do you feel there's any likelihood that you would want to return to that field as the varsity field?
No. I mean, as much history that's on 3, like, I appreciate it. I played there as when I came through high school. 13 feet from left field to right field. I mean, just kind of picture that. I'm not quite 6 foot tall. So, I mean, that's the difference from left field to right field. I mean, unless you're talking bulldozers coming in and flattening the field.
Yeah,
And then you're
the
talking
drainage is
like
the drainage.
Drainage and water runoff. I mean, I just don't see it ever being possible until you do go to a turf field, however many years, you know what I mean?
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
When we're talking about this resting schedule, is that doable with what we have now, you think?
We'll make it work.
Okay.
Definitely with our internal program, we should be able to figure that out. And Randy and I sat down and even looked at, there's better times to rest field 9, and there's better times to rest, field 8, and so forth, so we can work through that.
Okay.
One of the things, another challenge, and just so you guys are aware, another challenge is like, take junior high sports. We need them to try to be done by 5, because a lot of, those kids can't drive. So we might try to make sure that they can get on an activity bus. Not all kids may have a ride, so we need to have some way for them to get back and forth. So that's all the stuff we're taking into consideration. And we want the grass field to be as nice as it can, but we also want as many kids to participate as possible, which is kind of the point of it. So,
It's a delicate balance.
what's that?
It's a balance.
It's a balance, yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
And just for notification to the board, I'll make sure that this list of other things is sent out to everyone, the one that Mr. Hare referenced. Okay, moving on. 3.02, Susquehannock High School Building Project. We also have a presentation.
Thanks again, guys.
I'm not following you, Kat.
If you flip the switch on the side, it should work. Just let me know when you want to change side.
Okay, it was on, and okay, all right, it was on just now. I think we're good now. Okay, so Mr. Carrington, Mr. Buffington, and I are going to run through 2 major areas this evening. We will, what we'd like to do is kind of run through the first section, and then we'll take a break for questions, and then we'll run through the second section if that works for everybody. So the 2 major areas that we're going to talk about is an update on the Susquehannock High School renovation and additions project, and then review our next steps in the long-term building renovation plan. So we are going all over the place. So crazy. Okay, so we're going to start with the high school building project. We're going to look at budget versus actual. We did this a little bit at the January meeting, so we're a little out of sync on timing. We'll also look at large cost drivers, our use of contingency, our areas that are under budget, and then financing of the project, including interest earnings and the remaining funds needed for the project. I literally am not touching the button. Pat, what are you going to do?
There you are.
I don't know why, it flipped forward 5 slides.
Okay.
Just let me know when you want to change slides.
All right, so we're going to do it that way. So the first thing we'll look at, on the left, we have the original budget. So $70.4 million. And on the left, or on the right, we have the December revised budget. So you can see that there's about $500,000 of construction cost change orders between the original. So that's for our 4 primes. We also have, as was spoken about and we've talked about, and we're going to talk more this evening about, the major change in miscellaneous soft costs, which is where asbestos abatement is housed. Contingency is down to about $444,000. We'll explain how where we got there. And then financing costs, we reduced the budget for that, and we'll talk about why that is. Okay, so our use of contingency. So as I said, we have about $527,000 of change orders from our 4 prime contracts. We have $1,031,000 change orders for asbestos, and remember, we had a $50,000 budget, so that is up to $1,081,000. And then other soft cost changes, the major area there is due to builder's risk insurance coming in significantly higher than what our budget was in that area. So that gets us to about $1.6 million. We had a transfer that we reclassed to contingency on financing costs. Mr. Carrington will speak more about that later in the presentation. And then we had architectural credits of about $82,000, which is due to partial payment of change orders throughout the process, where there was deemed either 100%, 50%, or 15% charged to the contractor for a particular change order. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Buffington, who'll talk about the change order process.
So I just wanted to talk about change orders a little bit. Certainly, the board approved, before we started this project, a process to be able to keep change orders moving, review them and keep the job moving, because certainly, I think most of us understand that keeping the job moving is important to prevent delay claims and other issues. Certainly with change orders and, with many issues in construction, we do have a construction manager who's on site every day, and our architect also visits the job site routinely as well. But change orders, so a couple different buckets of change orders. So under $20,000, I can approve those on site. Certainly working with the construction manager and architect to understand what the issue is there. Most of our change orders fall within that category. At the January board meeting, we brought cost to repair existing walls in our existing locker room showers was one of those change orders. Change orders that are greater than $20,000, we need to come to the board for approval. We've had that, not many in this project. One example would be the backup support that was needed for the new wainscoting in our existing building. Basically, we were taking the green tile off and putting the new wainscot there, and that needed some extra support. And we came to the board with that ahead of time. And then the third category there is greater than $20,000, but it's an emergency, it's urgent. You need to keep the job moving, and much like I just had said, it is so important to keep that job moving that you don't get into claims and those types of things. But if we fall into that category, then the board secretary, along with consent from the chair of Buildings and Grounds and the president, would make that determination. The remainder of the board would be notified within 48 hours. We haven't had many of those, but the one example I would point out is last summer, as the contractors were working through creating the bus lane, and the back parking lot behind the middle school. There's actually some big storm tanks under the parking lot that were in the way of utilities that needed to keep moving, so that process was put into place that, we needed action to be able to keep that job moving, keep the project moving. And it was determined that we actually removed one of the tanks and filled one of the other ones. But just to kind of give you an example of those. So change order tracking, 2 reports that are provided to the board on a monthly basis. One by our construction manager, SiteLogic, and is attached to the board agenda. That report goes over the 4 primes, the change orders from the 4 primes and the cost from their contracts. So in our project of $70 million, that's about $60 million. of that. The other report that's attached monthly is from the district. Mr. Carrington puts this together, monthly report, project financial report that includes soft costs, which would also include the asbestos, and that's about $10 million. So 60 from the one report and 10 from the other. But also, you know, that report gives you a global look as well. Certainly, just some notes there. If you're looking at the monthly report from the construction manager, just how you can find items within there from approved change orders to open, ones that have been denied and closed, and those types of things. So asbestos abatement. Certainly, we have an environmental consultant that looks at not only the high school, but all our buildings, as well as myself, you know, on a 6-month surveillance, walk through any of the areas that have remaining asbestos to make sure that it hasn't been disturbed. The environmental consultant comes through on a 3-year cycle, as well as was involved before the high school project. The summer before we started, there was a little bit of known asbestos that was removed the summer of 2021, just ahead of the high school project starting. Certainly as we got into that, into the project, you know, and things were starting to be opened up, concealed areas were starting to be opened up, obviously we found additional asbestos. Things we needed to deal with. So we did, by opening up certain areas through the construction, find additional asbestos, as well as contractor asking for certain things to be tested. In particular, the floor mastic of the floor tile was one of the items to be requested. So I just want to kind of walk down through some examples of those items. As I said, the VCT, vinyl composite tile, floor tile, much like what you see here on the floor, was abated previously. So in the high school project years ago, you know, they abated the mastic in the floor tile. Some floor tile can actually have asbestos in it as well. But in our case, it's the mastic, it's the glue. And unfortunately, what we found is a lot of areas tested okay, but there were traces here and there that we needed to deal with. It's unfortunate, nobody wants to spend that money, you know, but it's something we needed to deal with. If you can picture the 1950s exterior facade, used to have big windows. Now it's covered with Dryvit, stucco. Within that system are old green windows, including 1950s caulk around those old windows. You can't see until you start pulling it away. Unfortunately, the 1950s exterior caulk has asbestos in it. They need to deal with it. Some of the other areas we opened up, there's actually an old plaster ceiling above the drop ceiling like we have here. In the high school, there's an old plaster ceiling. Above that, there was some additional plaster found, as well as pipe insulation. The pipe insulation years ago was abated, you know, and they traced the old lines through pipe tunnels and through various areas, getting, you know, as much as they could, but unfortunately found a little more. In the auxiliary gym roof panel, so the roof of the auxiliary gym, there's a small transite panel underneath the roof. We needed to penetrate for various, the electric and duct and things needed to go through there, so holes needed to be created in there. That transite panel, the remaining, is actually going to stay in place They actually encapsulate the edges to make it safe. But we are going to leave that in there for now, and probably to the foreseeable future. A shim, who would have thought, all of a sudden we opened up a wall, if you're familiar with the ticket booth that was across from the auxiliary gym, there was a shim in there and it tested positive for asbestos. And the old porch roof. Certainly one of the things, how much more? How much more do we have? One of the things, we put out bids, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but, so we have some encumbrance. Some of these dollars includes the bulk demo area, okay? So there may be some more uncovered, but the point I'm trying to make is we've encumbered, that $1 million encumbered some of the bulk demo area, if that makes sense. So certainly as we were putting things together, we actually looked back, Friendship Elementary, when we did that back in 2011, 2012, just under $60,000 of asbestos. Certainly similar age building, not quite the size, about one-third the size. But in comparison, much less asbestos at Friendship. If we can move to so as I had noted, one of the things, when we started getting some of these test results back, and knew we had, some issues, we quickly put some bids together. Because obviously, just like change orders, asbestos, you need to keep the job moving, So we got out ahead of the contractors. So the summer of '22, we were doing one phase. The summer of '23, we're doing another phase, staying ahead of where they were going to be as a contractor. As well as, we have some upcoming work in the bulk demo area that we'll be doing as well. So certainly, we'll continue to manage that. Certainly, it's not $1 million we want to spend, but we need to take the responsibility and abate the items. We can.
So thank you, Randy. I will cover a couple areas, really just under budget areas. Primarily, the biggest one is financing costs. So really the gist with financing costs and why that is one of our under budget areas. Originally, we were to have 2 additional bond issues that we did not have or do not anticipate having for this project. So when you think about why is that going to generate a savings, it's really closing costs. So if you're refinancing or if you have a mortgage, there's all those fees that kind of get bundled in. It's the easiest way to kind of talk about it. So by recommending, Mrs. Green and I, we recommended to our financial advisor and advisors that we did not need to do a $40 million, or not need to do a $30 million and a $10 million bond issue, and instead do one $40 million issue. That in turn saves some closing costs because 2 issues would generate not double, but some additional costs. And then as we've discussed before and we talked about, I believe in August, there's an additional $10 million issue that we do not anticipate needing to do. So that in turn saved some closing costs. And that $750,000 of savings in the budget that we weren't anticipating using, that was what was transferred to contingency in June. And then just another big area that is under budget is with the furniture, fixture, and equipment, and specifically the technology area. So right now, that's about $150,000 remaining. There are some needs that we anticipate having, but the project's not done yet. So until that point, we do believe we're comfortable in that $150,000 area. So those are just a couple highlights of some areas under budget. Randy's going to talk about another area.
Yeah, let me just add one thing real quickly. The other piece that we've not had to pay in our recent bond issues, so either the issues that we did for this project, we have not had to pay for bond insurance. That runs about $40,000 an issue. We never know if we're going to have to pay it, but due to our rating and financial health and audit, we have not had to pay that for our last couple issues. So that's another savings that we experienced as part of our financing.
So certainly another area under budget at this time are the allowances. Allowances are commonly included in large construction contracts like this to save costs on common change orders. Some examples on our project of allowances would include dealing with unsuitable soil, adding receptacles and wiring, adding exit signs and wiring, additional brick repointing. So you build those into the contract so that when those rather common items come up, you don't necessarily have to go right to a change order. You can go to the allowances. So there's a pot of these allowances that have a cost associated with those. If at the end of the job, we don't use all those allowances, we get that back as a deduct change order. So in essence, we would get those dollars back. Currently, we're sitting at over $200,000 of unused allowances. Job's not over yet, so I'm sure we'll use some of those. But I can assure you, every dollar, including allowances, we're watching closely, treating it like it's our own, and hope to, this is one area that, along with these others that are under budget, to hope to bring the whole project within, under budget.
So I'll talk about financing of the project briefly. So at this point, we've borrowed $64 million, about $64 million for the project to date. In addition, we've had interest earnings on invested funds of about $1.7 million. Just to highlight that a little bit, when we began the project and before that, we conducted an RFP for financial advisors. So we do take that seriously, and we did look at companies that would be able to help us with investing the funds through the project. So again, when we started this process, rates were pretty much zero or lower. Rates were very poor now, and this is the amount, rates, I mean what we can invest and get, not what we were paying. So at this point, rates are 5%, 4%. They're much, much higher. So interest earnings have been much greater than we anticipated. When we did this presentation in June, that number was much lower. It was about, I forget exactly what it was, but we have increased it to $1.67 million, and that's just through June is our anticipated interest earnings. We have a remaining amount of about $4.7 million that would be funded from what we have assigned fund balance in our general fund, and it's assigned for capital projects. We'll touch on that in the next couple slides. And that was approved in August of 2023. That was our big change to the financial plan. I believe at this point, I will hold for questions.
You mentioned that instead of doing a $30 million and a $10 million bond issue, you did $140 million, and then you decided not to do $10 million. So that accounts for 40 of the 64. What was the mechanism for borrowing the other 24 million that was borrowed?
So we did two slightly under 10 million. We get better interest rates if we usually do 9,995,000. And then we had a greatest needs, which we'll talk a little bit about.
What, sorry?
We did greatest needs projects, so we borrowed about 10 million there. Half of it went to greatest needs projects, half of it went to the high school.
Okay.
So that's where your other four comes in. And we can talk a little bit about why we decided to go with a $40 million bond issue instead of a 30 and a 10. A lot of times it's recommended that you can do one $10 million bond issue a year, and they're what's called a bank qualified. It's not because it's through a bank, but it's called a bank qualified issue, and you get lower interest rates. So it is highly recommended to do that when you can. When we were going out for the $30 million issue at the beginning of that, rates were still at a low point. They were coming up slightly, but the economic forecast was that things were going to turn. So at that point, we wanted to lock in the rates. So we decided to go with the 40 million. Also, I'm a little skeptical. If we're going to go out very quickly for another bond issue, there is the closing cost piece that's always going to be there. So between the interest rate environment and the closing cost piece, we thought it was better to go that direction. The other thing is that ended up being our last bond issue. So at the end of the day, I think that was the right choice to make, and we ended up saving overall on the financing piece. So I don't know if you have.
Thank you. On the asbestos, where are we, and I hope I'm not surprising you, do we have any idea where we are with that legislation that?
We don't. I did ask the senator about it, and she is checking into the grants. She knows that they're not retroactive.
Yeah,
but
not retroactive.
Before starting the demo phase, maybe we'd be able to apply for that new grant for asbestos abatement.
Okay.
But that's only 50% recovery, and not sure if it would apply since we haven't started, but we are already in the project.
Okay, so it might not apply even to future work because the project is already underway?
It has, and that's what she's going to clarify.
Okay, so we're waiting. So I guess what would be useful to know is I don't know to what extent any parts of the project are reorderable, but if we're waiting on an answer for that we think that we're going to get in the next couple of weeks, and there's something we were going to do asbestos in that time frame that could be done later, we may want to keep a close eye on that so that we don't miss a window where we could get that, because the grant exists, it's been passed, right?
Right, and I do believe Mrs. Green is already aware and fully.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did look at something today, so we're keeping all the grants very, very near and dear to our heart and looking at those. So I did see something today, and it basically said awaiting. I think that one's PDE, I don't want to speak to that, but whichever agency it is that's responsible, we're waiting, and I think it's PDE.
Okay.
So they have not released anything. Some of the other grants have grant guidelines and that we're looking at already. That one is still awaiting PDE, so we haven't heard anything.
Okay. Yeah, and it'd be hard to delay the project based on something that they may get back to you at some point versus they'll be back to us within 2 weeks, just hold out or whatever.
The other thing I think, and I'll let Mr. Buffington speak to, the other thing I think we have to be careful of, so as he spoke, all known asbestos that we are aware of, we have encumbered. So it would be something that we don't know at this point, and we've bid that long already, so I don't think that would qualify based on what we're hearing. The other piece is from moving the job forward. The next piece, major piece, once we get out of school, is the demo. So to hold that up, even if we got it all paid for, we would have such delay. So
Right, yeah, it was only if...
unfortunately, I think we're
yeah.
going to miss that.
Yeah, only if it was actually reorderable or delayable in some way.
Right.
And then final question from me, I think, unless something prompts another one. What Mr. Betts spoke to in terms of the masonry in sub-zero temperatures. Can anyone speak to his concerns on that?
Yeah, certainly, and I'll talk to we have a construction manager on site as well as there's a testing agent, that checks mortar and things like that, so I definitely review, with them, but certainly there's eyes on that work and the whole job.
So it's being inspected as we go?
It is. And
Am I wrong that we were going to paint it in the first, at the beginning, we were going to paint it? We weren't going to take it down, correct? So we wouldn't have looked at that, or am I completely off?
I think you're on two different
things, okay.
So
No,
the
that's
one
fine.
was the masonry work that's in district admin.
Oh,
I believe
that.
you're
I'm sorry.
talking with
Yes, the green.
about the green tile.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you go down the one hallway, we did try some paintings.
Right.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
nothing
No, I-
would stick really well, so that's
Sorry,
what
I
that
completely.
thought is. And just one more thought on Mr. Henkel's thought there. Certainly, future projects, and these grants, we want to keep an eye on, for sure.
Yeah, so if we go to demolition, the parts of the demolition that we already know there's asbestos there has already been out to bid. So that's already included in the $1 million. Or
Yes.
million and change. But if we were to run into something new and have to go to bid mid-demolition, that's where maybe it could come into play.
Maybe. I'm hoping we don't have that, and
I think we all are.
most likely aren't going to bid. It would be if isn't astronomical, it'd probably be a change order. But we'll keep a pulse on it. You know, I know one of the organizations that the three of us belong to keeps good tabs on that as well. So I'll certainly, with our facilities group, be chatting about that as well.
And your construction manager, is he third party?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's Site Logic is the construction.
Site Logic?
From Site Logic, okay.
Yep.
So I would say on the asbestos front that I did meet with Susan and Randy and the lead company that developed the asbestos plan. You know, we're working forward to sort of kind of put all of the pieces together, what happened. The only thing that I heard in the meeting that may have mitigated some of it, when they removed the ceilings, has happened so many times, it's a patchwork quilt up there, you know, pipes and wires have been ran for changes over years, and it gets to be quite a, you know, a mess. And in that process, a decision was made to remove the old plastered ceiling above, which is, you know, hindsight's always 20/20. You know, it's certainly reasonable to understand the thought process of wanting to clean that mess up while the ceiling's gone. But in that, some of the asbestos was exposed, like the pipe insulation and, you know, things of that nature. So maybe some of that could have been avoided by letting sleeping dogs lie, but at the same time, it is understandable wanting to sort of clean up the mess while there isn't a ceiling tile in the way to do it. But that certainly was a factor into it. And I'd really like to highlight that, and you already said it, Mr. Buffington, that the numbers that they put forward by square footage were close to being in line with the Friendship project. The Friendship project was roughly about $20,000 in asbestos abatement. Extrapolating that forward 3 times larger, we were at 50, you know, 3 times larger would have been 60. So I can understand maybe some using past performance to try to predict future events. But I think that also sometimes listening to the experts can come around and bite you. And I think that this is a case that's certainly part of it. You know, that the company that, you know, was giving us a clean bill of health was, you know, significantly wrong. And some of it was in places where, you know, like the asbestos in the glue, you know, had already been mitigated, except for the mitigating practices then, and the mitigating practices now are different. So therefore, it led us down a road where there was more that needed to be taken care of. Even though it was, the glue was less than 1%, is that correct? Yeah.
Some areas, yep.
Yeah, less than 1%, and yet it still needed to be treated with the same abatement processes. So maybe slightly easier when it's less than 1%, but, you know, still obviously very costly. And, you know, it was a difference in process from, I believe, the 80s to today.
I doubt anyone has the answer to this right off the bat, but the Friendship project, if we're trying to use that as a baseline, I guess the question there would be, was there any known asbestos in Friendship before we began that project? Because one thing I do note here is that the VCT was previously abated, the glue was previously abated, and so there were known instances of asbestos here that might hint at more, that might hint that there might be more to uncover. Whereas if with Friendship, if we never found any asbestos until we actually started doing a project, then it's, okay, maybe you think, well, maybe they didn't really use asbestos in this building. Whereas here, we had evidence of it before that we had abated, but that still, that still suggests that there could be more.
There was, at Friendship decades ago, it was abated, there was some abated, and for that project, there was some known that we got rid of as the project was starting.
Okay, so in some ways, the same situation where there was known asbestos, it had been abated, and then when we got into it, there wasn't that much more.
There was some known that then we took care of. I can't recall, we can look back, I can't recall an instance where there was some that was abated and we had to abate a second time at Friendship. I'm not aware of that at Friendship.
Okay, yeah.
But
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, the auxiliary gym transite roof panel, that was the one that we're encapsulating
Yes.
the edges on?
Yes.
I mean, isn't that kind of just setting us up for a problem down the road?
We're going to have to manage it, and like we do with all, with our asbestos, it's in a management plan, but yeah, we're going to have to be careful with it. Certainly, it'd be costly to get rid of it. I could get
Yeah.
numbers, but it's very costly,
No, it's fully encapsulated and was fully encapsulated prior to the project.
Yeah, over the auxiliary gym, there's a spray insulation underneath it, so you can't even see it there. There was a storage room that's getting converted into the fitness room. There you can see the panel. There's where they had to cut up through it, actually, and there's where we're going to encapsulate the edges. So when you make a cut, you have to encapsulate that cut edge has to be encapsulated. But yeah.
So I mean, maybe, once again, hindsight's 20/20. If we had known that the panel was there, we could have serviced that area differently as far as heating and air conditioning is concerned and not have to cut through that ceiling. But now knowing that it's there, we certainly would never have to be tied into cutting through it again. We could choose to approach it from a different direction and not cut through that ceiling again, now that we know it's there.
Right. Yep.
Knowledge of where the asbestos is can help us plan any future projects to avoid it.
Yeah. And, yes.
And this is just because I don't know the answer. Like, where is this sort of document, this kind of knowledge that we're gaining, where is this all documented? So 5, 10 years from now, we,
There's a management plan, and it's binders thick, that we have. Part of what I mentioned earlier, on a 6-month surveillance, October and April. Anybody wants to walk along, they're welcome to go along. But actually go check these areas, make sure that they're not being disturbed. Actually our staff is trained, where these areas are, so they're not disturbing those. So that we do every 6 months. Every 3 years, the professional comes and documents that as well. So it's in this management plan that we continue to constantly refer back to. Certainly, these items that, were found, are going to be, that the transite panel will be in that plan. And, it's a living document that keeps on going.
That we will keep forever.
thank you.
We will. It'll be, yes.
Can I make a positive comment? We didn't talk a whole lot about, but kudos to Trevor, to Sue, because I know we focused a lot on asbestos removal and abatement, but there's a celebration on the financial perspective of savings that were outside of what the budget predicted, that I think will help us in the long run still come in at budget, potentially, cross your fingers, under budget, for the entire project. So I don't want that to go kind of miss opportunity to say thank you for all the hard work with the bond issues. And so a lot of that is a guessing game too, with interest rates, et cetera. So thank you.
We ready to move forward? Trevor, you want to start us off?
So I will kick
I
us
move.
off. Just talking about the long-term capital plan. To start that, we have to have an idea of how we're going to pay for that long-term capital plan. So before we touch on that, this is a plan that I think Sue has mentioned before, has started many, many years ago. I won't quote the year because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it started several years ago, and this is just truly a step in the plan. So as of June 30th, 2023, which is the date of our audited financial statements, we had $14,353,000 of general fund reserved or assigned for capital projects. As was shown on a couple slides ago, we have a proposed use to complete the high school project of about $4.7 million. We have an additional $1.2 million for proposed use for the sewer project, and that was one of the projects of greatest needs, which leaves about $8.4 million of assigned or reserved funds for future capital projects. And then in addition, we have a debt service fund balance as of June 30th, 2023, about $6.3 million. And what that debt service fund balance represents, this financial plan that we've had for many years, includes the increase of millage every year. And so what we've been doing is transferring that budgeted millage over to the debt service fund. That way we could prepare for these future capital projects. More to be discussed about this whole plan, but just wanted to give a brief update of where we are with our funds.
Okay. So we're going to back up a couple years when the plan started. So if we go back to October of 2017, we began discussion and planning for our long-term building needs, including financing and debt structure. So one of the things that I've heard over the years is as we do projects, we want to make sure that the first project is as robust as the last project, or maybe backwards. The last project is as robust as the first project. And so that when we get to the end and we do the last project, we're not without any funds, no ability to do what needs to be done in that project to the fullest extent. So as we were putting this plan together, we wanted to look at a couple pieces, all of the projects that needed to be done, and then how we were going to fund that. So if you think of your own home, you have a couple ways you can look at it. You can say, oh, my roof is 20 years old, my roof is 25 years old, my roof is 27 years old, and then you can decide that you need a new roof. Or as your roof gets to 20 years old, you can start putting money back and putting a plan in place to replace that roof. And you can fill in the blank with other home things. But really how we looked at it is we need to make a plan so that we are able to keep our buildings to the level that they are. We are very, very fortunate. We have all of our buildings. We've not abandoned a building in Southern New York. Our buildings are beautiful. They're very old. We hear all the time how wonderful they are, so we just want to keep them to that level. So really that's what this plan, starting back in 2017, proposed. So, as I said, we started in 2017. By October of 2018, through a request for proposal process, the architect was selected to conduct a feasibility study of all district buildings. So you're going to hear us say feasibility study, facility study. It's the same thing. We kind of use those interchangeably, so I apologize for that. But basically, it's a look at all of our facilities so that we understand where all of them are and what the needs are across the district. So you don't want to look at just one particular building. Then, we continued to work through the feasibility study. In May of 2019, the board approved the completed feasibility study and approved to move forward with the greatest needs projects and then the high school project. So one of the things that was different as we were working through this, in the past, when you did a building project, you would have Plan Con money. So you would have some state money reimbursement for the project. There hasn't been state reimbursement for many years, and although we planned this project and followed the steps in case there was state reimbursement, there hasn't been any. So as we were working through it, one of the things that we were able to do is we were able to look at, we don't necessarily have to do everything in the major project. Before, you would want to do everything in your major project so you can get that reimbursement from the state. Now that there isn't any, we could separate those two pieces apart. So I'll talk about that in a minute. The next date is highlighted because it is a critical date. On March 12th, 2020, we had a board meeting, and the board approved the schematic design for the high school and authorized the team to proceed with the design development drawings for the high school project. That was the day before schools closed and everything closed for the pandemic. So at that point, we hit pause. Even though we were ready to go, we hit pause for about a year, and it put us a year behind where we originally had planned to be. The other pause that we took was last year. We planned to go into design development for the second project. We knew that we would have some change in board membership, and we wanted to wait till we had new board members, which is why we planned the Buildings and Grounds meeting for January to kick things off. So, long-term major building renovation plan, the district-wide facility study or feasibility study. It looks at enrollment. So our district enrollment projections show a consistent, stable enrollment. So we were looking at this. There's not a plan to add additions for enrollment. So that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at really facility conditions. So our study shows that the buildings have been well maintained, but many components and systems are nearing end of life and should be updated to meet the current codes and standards. So as we go through the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the uniqueness of a school and how we have to look at things a little bit differently from timing. So our greatest needs project. So I spoke a little bit about that. This is a list of items that, excuse me, that as we're going through the feasibility study, we decided to pull forward and do immediately so that as we're going through this long-term 10-plus year plan, we would get these things out of the way so that we could keep the buildings up and running. So we did chiller replacements at Shrewsbury Elementary, Southern Elementary, and Southern Middle School. We did a bridge infill here at the middle school and gym bleachers at the middle school. And the bridge infill was really, with the elevator, you had to go outside of the building, down the elevator, outside the building, then back into the building. So it's now infilled, so you don't have to leave the building when you do that. So that's an accessibility issue. And the gym bleachers piece of that is we were not able to fit the student body into the auditorium, so the bleachers allowed the whole school to be in one space. We also had window replacement at Southern Elementary and Southern Middle School. We know with window replacement, we expect to have better utility costs from that. And then we had Susquehannock High School auditorium and theatrical lighting. So that was a piece we could do that wouldn't be damaged. I missed the roof sections at the middle school and Susquehannock High School. So when I first became a business official, I thought, oh, you replace your roof like you do at home. It really doesn't work that way. We have many, many sections that are different years old. So as when we're outside of renovation projects, we're pretty much doing different sections of roof all the time. Randy does a wonderful job with that, testing the roofs. We don't say it's 20 years or 25 years old. We need to update it. We have consultants come out and look at our roofs just to make sure where they are in the cycle. We also had new underground electrical service for the main campus. Again, that was one of the things to prepare for the building project, to make sure that we got that done ahead of time. And then we talked about the sewer line replacement. That one is the one piece that is still in process. So all of the other projects here totaled about $5.1 million. And we did those before we started with the high school to get them out of the way. Turn it over to Randy.
Let me look a little closer at the district-wide facility study. In particular, I want to look at, let's pick Shrewsbury Elementary. And so this facility study kind of shows, things that, may need replaced or updated. You know, one of the good things, and I think Sue had mentioned, you know, our facilities are solid. We have solid facilities. But even with that, there's a time when, you know, mechanical systems and other systems begin to wear out and begin to be not as efficient and need to be either replaced or modified. But some of the things, so Shrewsbury Elementary, within the study, if you can picture the main canopy, the front canopy at Shrewsbury Elementary, you walk back then towards the building. What happens when you walk to the office? You actually leave the protection of the canopy, you're out to the elements, back to go to the office. So if it's pouring down raining, you'll get out of the rain, back into the rain before you go into the office. One of the things, you know, certainly if we would do a project, you know, adding to that canopy would make a lot of sense. Certainly enhancing safety items within the building. The roof, 20 years old. We keep an eye on all our roofs, as Sue had mentioned. You know, we also have a local roofer that keeps an eye on our roofs as well at a very low cost, no cost. It's a, you know, great thing to have, you know, cooperation there and have a professional eye on those roofs as well. And certainly, you know, one of the first things, you know, to protect our investment are our roofs, you know. So the roof at Shrewsbury is out of its warranty, you know, and is nearing the end of life. One of the other things at Shrewsbury, you know, and you may recall over the years, and I've lost count, literally, I know it's over half a dozen, but there's a connection between the water lines and toilets, urinals, and other fixtures. That's a weak connection. Unfortunately, you know, when you push on, say, the toilet handle, we've had those crack. Unfortunately, that's a larger size line. As our plumber in the corner knows, that's a lot of water real quickly. And if it's on the top floor, it goes down through, you know, and has created a mess. So certainly that's something we would want to take care of. Boilers are nearing the end of life, as well as other HVAC, unit ventilators, fan coils, air handling units are nearing the end of the life. The carpet, most of it original, maybe even all of it. I know most of it is original to the building. It's time to be replaced. So you look at that. One of the things I want to stress, when we look at doing a major building project, certainly we're looking to do these pieces together, you know, to lessen disruption to classes. But it's not take everything out of the building. You evaluate every system, you know, what can be kept, what needs to be, you know, replaced.
Yeah, I just want to make a clarification real quick. So the data on here is from the study in 2019, so where it says the roof is 20 years old, add 5 years to that.
Yeah. So let's look at all our buildings. You know, obviously, you know, we're in renovation of the high school. But the rest of so our other 4 facilities, Shrewsbury, over 26 years since it was built. Southern Middle, 24 plus years since it was renovated back in 2000. Southern Elementary, the same. We did those 2 projects at the same time. We're going to try to avoid that in the future. Was anybody here on campus when that was happening? Yeah, it was pretty busy and pretty chaotic. So if we can, we want to try to avoid that, you know. But, you know, we'll have to see how we go. So reasons why we would want to consider major building renovations versus trying to do smaller projects. Certainly, you know, as the study had shown, a significant amount of our systems are nearing the end of life. There's also an economy of scale of doing some of these things together. We limit disruption, eliminate rework. In particular, So if we would go replace the roof now, but then depending on what we would do with the HVAC system, we may have to start poking holes in a brand-new roof. So we'd want to coordinate that together to try to minimize that. So, and certainly, as the carpet I had pointed at, all of a sudden you go replace the carpets, but then we're going to do, other projects above that carpet. We want to try to coordinate that, so carpet's one of the last things, do the heavy work and then, coordinate that together. I think I'm handing it back to Mrs. Green.
Okay, so at your places, you have a handout with proposed timelines. So I'm actually going to skip to the next slide, if you don't mind, Kat. Thank you. So this is a draft schedule, which is an illustration of project number 2, but on your handout, it has all of the remaining projects so that we can kind of look at them together. And as we said from the beginning, we want to look at the district as a whole, not just one project. But really, from design to construction is approximately 3 years. So it takes a long time to work through one of these projects. So the recommended schedule here would be starting design in June of 2024. It would take about 12 to 14 months for design. We would bid in August of 2025 with an award date of November of 2025, with construction beginning between April and June of 2026 and construction ending between August and December of 2027. There are a couple months built in here for leeway if we would need it. There's not a lot built in. There's a couple months. But one of the things that we wanted to point out that I know when I started in this business, I had to wrap my head around. In a school, timing is critical. So if we were to move 3 or 4 months, what that would do is it would throw our timeline probably off a year, because we really want to make sure that we're maximizing that time in the summer. So late spring, early summer, into when school's starting. At that point, it does a couple things. It's less disruption for our students, which is our primary focus. So the more that we can do during the summers, so if we can do that prep work, so if you look at the construction is beginning April to June, there may be some things we can do that don't disrupt the students before school's out and really gets us moving. The second thing that it does is it reduces costs. So the more we can do in the summer, the shorter the timeline, and also the trades can get in there and basically work whenever they need to work, however they need to work, because the students aren't in there. So that is a critical piece. And when we were working through the high school, we originally were at a 36-month, I think it was 36-month timeline, and we worked to get that down for multiple reasons. Disruption to students obviously being one of the main ones, and then reduction in costs, the more you can reduce the schedule. And that's why we have the ranges there. We want to do that as much as possible. The other piece as we're working through this is looking at the design team. So as we talked about earlier, we have an architect, we have a construction manager, then we have on-site, Mr. Buffington would not be doing the day-to-day, but he would answer the day-to-day questions if our construction manager or architect would need assistance. But they're here day-to-day to help with those things. And then the last member of that team, or last 2 members, we have owners' meetings once a month, which involve myself and then whichever principal it would be of the building that's under construction. So our estimates are as of 2020. They are not as of the date of the feasibility study, because what we did was we took the estimates from the feasibility study. We added in, I think, a 3.5% incremental inflation piece, because we know that costs don't stay the same. But they are as of 2020. We know what has happened since 2020. The biggest proponent has been the labor market. We don't believe that that's going to improve. If anything, possibly, looking at all the research, it possibly could get worse, because as more folks in the baby boomer category retire, the labor market is a concern. So our 2020 estimates are listed on the left. Current estimates are significantly more. Now, I will say this, for the current estimates, we basically used a square footage from our construction manager and extrapolated that. So that's why we have a range there, and we'd have to work into design and what is decided to really hone in on those. But I did want to present something reasonable as far as the cost component, because what we have for a 2020 estimate at this point is not reasonable anymore. Okay, so gone through a lot. So at this point, we'd like to answer any questions the board has about the plan, and then seek direction from the board about which direction we want to move forward. We can begin our next major building project, or we can look at areas of greatest need. So if we decide to go forward with the next project, okay, the next steps would be approval to seek legal review of our request for proposals for our architect and construction manager, and then solicit for proposals, either at the February or March board meeting. We would also ask that we approve 1 or 2 board members to be part of the professional selection process. So we'll solicit requests for proposals and then do interviews. So we would ask that we would have a couple board members be part of that process. And then either at the April or May board meeting, we would recommend that we approve that architect and construction manager, which gets us the ability to start design in June. Again, we can slide a little bit if we, if we wanted to move 1 or 2 months. I think we would be fine with that. We built that in, but sliding a lot would probably push us significantly, probably to the next year. And then the other option that we could look at, of course, we can look at not doing anything. We wouldn't recommend that because we do believe there's critical things for the buildings, but we could also look at areas of greatest need. So if we're not proceeding with the renovation project at this time, we could bring back recommendations on what is needed from a minimal standpoint for each building, and then a timeline, a scope of work for those particular items. And then, as Mr. Buffington pointed out, so if we were to, for instance, at Shrewsbury, if we were to just do the roof and not the HVAC system, what would be some of the concerns with that, and how we would move forward? So we could definitely bring that forth also. So at this point, we're going to open up for questions.
Yes, I have a couple questions. I would like to see and have a better understanding of what greatest needs are. And then also a general understanding of the scope of what you're looking at to do I'm assuming, starting with Shrewsbury. However, understanding the problem with the water lines in the bathrooms at the flush valves, it's a bit of a ticking time bomb. And I would think that would be something we would really want to remedy while school is out, this coming summer, if at all possible, to prevent more floods. I think that, it's understandable why it happened. It's understandable that those codes no longer exist, and that we can get that monkey off of our back and get that problem solved, so it doesn't, we don't have that ticking time bomb there. You guys understand what?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned to me that it's a combination of metal and plastic fittings, and it was to basically adhere to guidelines at the time about how you couldn't use copper pipes and come in within regulations, and now those regulations have been rolled back. So, I mean, yeah. So I don't. You gave the option of doing nothing, and given some of these issues, that just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem like a viable option. It didn't seem like you were suggesting it's a viable option. On the other hand, I look at the estimates here, and quick add up comes up just under $100 million is I believe the combined cost of the kind of the mid-range of all those, and I'd say of myself, it'd be hard for me to find the appetite for that. to take on $100 million worth of projects. That said, I do understand the greatest needs. I think what maybe is the approach I'd like to see is a greatest needs approach with a longer term view, so that you're doing things like looking at, maybe the roof needs to be replaced earlier than the HVAC, but it makes sense to do both at the same time. Well, let's do both at the same time. And even if that front loads a little bit of the cost. And I think in particular, while I don't have a huge appetite for $100 million worth of renovations, I think because we're in an environment where right now we're able to make more money on our investments, but we may not always be in that, and we're really restricted on the types of investments we can make. The one thing we can do is invest in capital projects that we're going to have to do anyway. So if I can be convinced that it's something we have to do anyway, then it's not necessarily, we're in a good financial condition. It doesn't necessarily make sense to defer it longer if that ends up being more expensive in the long run. But I'm not, it would be tough to convince me that we actually, in the time frame of the, 8 years, that we need to spend $100 million. For me, the greatest needs approach is at least, I mean, the information here isn't very detailed, but just at a first blush, I'm more inclined toward that.
What's the turnaround you could potentially give us for a greatest needs estimate and line item? Like what are we talking about? How long?
Sitting a couple weeks away from February, I would think we're looking at the March board meeting.
And I was pausing a second there, because I think one thing, if we want to move forward with that approach, one thing we may want to consider is having an architect come in and dust off that feasibility study and really take a look at it from that greatest needs perspective versus the whole building perspective. So that's why I was kind of pausing a second, just to, I think that might be a really good approach if we can. So we might be able to bring something back by February or March to seek a proposal to have that done, if the board is willing to take a look at that, because I think that might be a way we want to go to really seek an outside opinion too, because it's been 5 years.
Right.
Yeah. I think the
Yeah,
other
those
thing
needs
is-
may have changed in the last 5 years.
And ranked differently. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, certainly, we want to be mindful of $100 million, but I think we also want to look at that inefficiencies as well, kind of see okay, what all needs replaced, and, I'm just concerned about having to redo things or that inefficiency, so I think we want to look at that as well, and maybe.
Yeah, so that's why I'm thinking if we ask the consultant, we'll be able to work through that. The other thing, when we talked about, I thought you were going here, but you went in a different direction. When we talk about inefficiencies, Randy and I have both been here a long time, as everybody knows. The further we got away from building projects, the more we spent on maintenance and upkeep. So there is that balance too. And that's really, can I go back and point exactly to how much it was? Not necessarily, but I know as we worked through it each year with the budget, we would need more, we needed more services and more things kept as we get away from. Obviously, if something's brand new, it needs less than if it's not. So as we're working through it, I think we also want to look at that piece, but I'd like to really dust off that feasibility study and kind of.
Yeah, from a cost standpoint, I can try to put my fingers on it, but one of the amazing things, when we did the Friendship Project, it was about 75,000 square foot building before we added on 25,000 to make it 100,000 square foot building. The utility costs after the project was over were less than the utility costs before the project, and it was 25,000 square feet bigger. So there's some efficiencies as well, energy savings and things as well.
Also, sorry.
I haven't read through the feasibility study for for Shrewsbury, and I still didn't get a good sense of the scope of work that they were really suggesting. I mean, it talked about individual pieces, you know, whether it be on the mechanical side, the plumbing, the electrical, be as it may, but it didn't really have a good scope of understanding of, you know, what kind of major renovation would be included in it. It did talk about, obviously, if you do a major renovation, you have to do this. If you do a major renovation, you have to do that to bring things up to new codes, and those codes have probably even changed since that feasibility study was done. But it didn't have a very good grasp on the master plan of what it was trying to accomplish. So, you know, maybe if we're going to do another, or dust that off, as you say, we should try to focus a little bit more on what it's really trying to accomplish, because by its own findings, you know, we would only be, you know, across our elementary schools, you know, somewhere at around 60% capacity. So, you know, a major renovation would be hard to understand when we're running at about, you know, 40% of non-used capacity by its numbers across our elementary schools. So I think it would need more than what it has to be convincing about the needs for major renovations to the building. I mean, it did talk about, one thing I remembered speaking about was collaborative spaces, but it would seem that if we're at 60% capacity roughly, that, you know, there would be, you know, there should be room for collaborative spaces, you know, some way or another.
Yeah, the one thing, and again, we can bring back more information, but when you look at the capacity of a school building, they're assuming 25 children in each space, and that includes, so you could have a special education classroom where there is really only allowed to be 8 children in that classroom. So you're never going to get to capacity. So as we're working through it, we can bring some more information back on that. I'm not saying we're at 100% capacity by any means, but I think it's probably higher than, in reality, probably higher than 60, because you'll never get to what they're saying full capacity is for the building, because you're not really allowed to for.
Sure. I mean, but I mean, how many special classrooms needs do we have in Shrewsbury? Do we know a rough number?
I'd say we have at least 7, 8.
Okay.
We have several IU classrooms. We actually have preschool IU. So, and those numbers wouldn't factor in to even our enrollment numbers. So that's all.
Well, and if they're not, you know, doing their capacity numbers correctly, then we should adjust for that if we're gonna relook at it.
That's a PDE format. That's why I'm saying, usually when we present the feasibility study, we actually walk through that piece of it, because that is how you have to present it for PDE. Remember, I talked about, we did the feasibility study so that if we were able to get reimbursement from PDE, we'd have everything in place. So it was done following the PDE guidelines.
Gotcha.
Really, if I had to summarize Shrewsbury project, there isn't expansion. There isn't a bunch from a structural standpoint of the building that's even being suggested. It is mostly renovating existing, from infrastructure to carpet to paint, but there's not a ton of added stuff, so to speak.
The one big
Yeah,
thing.
you know, as Dr. Bryson has said, mechanical finishes, the one thing we'd have to look at, all our facilities except for Shrewsbury have a full fire sprinkler system. I think we'd want to add that. We may actually be required. That's one of the things we'd check with code, but certainly right now it has a limited sprinkler system in storage areas and things, but once you start replacing HVAC equipment and you're bringing the ceilings down and things, you know, it's time with sprinkler and other things, but.
So I'm assuming that we as a board would like to see, or at least have a better understanding of greatest needs versus the full scope of project.
I think regardless, for my comfort, I would have always requested that. I just need a point of comparison. I mean, if it ends up, and I'm not saying that you're suggesting this, but I mean, if it ends up that greatest needs is 80% of what a project would have been anyway, then I can properly evaluate what that 20 was, but I need it from a comparison standpoint.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I also understand that you're saying that by all of your time estimations, that a June start on that design work is pretty much universal. And you at least have it starting in.
Slide a little bit, slide a little bit, but I would say that you could start in August. If you get much past that, then we're gonna push to
Okay, I
stay
understand.
in that really good window.
Yeah, and Sue had mentioned the summers is critical, and if you look at the project that's laid out, you actually get 2 summers. So making sure we get the 2 summers.
Correct.
Is important.
So just want to make sure we understand as we're moving forward. So our recommendation, based upon the discussion this evening, will be to take a look at the feasibility study, work with design professional to update that, and then prioritize the recommendations based upon greatest needs for each of the 3 remaining buildings. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep, fantastic.
And if we're going to go to that level and getting them involved again, it would be great if some of their findings could be backed up by our own maintenance records, and things that we are seeing internally that are causing us, maybe continued problems or, whatever the case may be, specific areas, specific units, that are causing us higher maintenance issues than others, and sort of try to blend the two together of an understanding of a real world of what's happening in our maintenance world in the building versus their recommendations, and how they kind of line up with one another, or maybe don't line up with one another.
Yeah, and certainly, we can involve our head mechanic as well, who's hands-on, boots on the ground every day with some of that information as well. Obviously, our facilities are aging, but yeah, there are troubled units over others.
Sure.
But also a holistic look as well.
Some areas get worked harder than others, units get worked harder than others.
Any other questions for us?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
That's a lot of work and
For
information.
all of your work
Thank
on
you.
this. Okay, item number 4, do we have any new business? Okay, hearing none. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any nays or abstentions? Meeting is adjourned.